The bitter December wind whistled through the narrow streets of Steins Pass, New Mexico, carrying flakes of snow that stung like tiny needles against Nora Blackwell's flushed cheeks. Her hands trembled as she gripped the worn leather reins of the wagon, her swollen belly pressing uncomfortably against her threadbare coat. 8 months pregnant and completely alone, she had traveled over 200 miles after her husband's death, chasing the promise of a new life with her only living relative and aunt she hadn't seen since childhood. The small mining town appeared deserted in the growing darkness of the winter evening. Lanterns flickered in windows, casting long shadows across the frozen ground. Nora pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders as the wagon creaked to a stop in front of the only establishment still showing signs of life, the Frontier Inn. The weathered sign swung precariously in the wind, the painted letters faded from years of harsh desert sun and winter storms. Her joints ached as she climbed down from the wagon, one hand supporting her heavy belly. The journey had been longer and harder than she had anticipated, and the baby seemed to sense her distress, kicking frantically against her ribs. A sharp pain shot through her lower back, causing her to pause and take a deep breath before continuing toward the inn's entrance. The warmth that greeted her as she pushed open the heavy wooden door was almost overwhelming after hours in the bitter cold. The main room was filled with the mingled scents of tobacco, whiskey, and something savory cooking in the kitchen. A few men hunched over tables nursing drinks while a piano played softly in the corner. Nora approached the front desk where a heavy-set man with a thick gray mustache was busy examining a ledger. He glanced up, his eyes quickly taking in her condition, the smudges of dirt on her face and her obviously well-worn traveling clothes. "Evening, madam," he said, his tone not entirely welcoming. "What can I do for you?" "I need a room for the night," Nora replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "Just one night. I'll be continuing on to Silver City tomorrow to find my aunt." The innkeeper frowned. "Don't have any rooms available, madam. We're full up with the railroad crew and some cattle buyers in town." Nora felt her heart sink. "Please, sir, I've been traveling for days. I have money." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. "I can pay." The man's eyes narrowed. "It ain't about the money. I said we're full." His gaze drifted to her swollen belly. "Besides, we don't need any complications. The nearest doctor is 30 miles away." "I'm not due for another month," Nora protested, fighting to keep her composure as another pain radiated through her back. "I just need somewhere warm to sleep tonight." "Not here, you don't." The innkeeper's voice grew harder. "Try the church. Maybe the preacher's wife will take pity on you." From a dark corner of the room, a tall figure rose from his seat. The man moved with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to hard living in unforgiving country. His spurs jingled softly against the wooden floor as he approached the desk. "That ain't right, Morris," the man said, his voice low but clear in the suddenly quiet room. Turning away a lady in her condition. Nora turned to look at the stranger. He was taller than she had first thought, broad-shouldered with sun-weathered skin that spoke of years under the open sky. His dark blonde hair was tied back at the nape of his neck, and his eyes, a startling shade of blue, regarded her with quiet concern. The innkeeper's face reddened. "Stay out of this, Lucas. Inn's full, and that's that." Lucas Jameson had been riding for the Diamond Cross Ranch for 5 years, but he had never considered himself a hero or even a particularly good man. He had spent most of his adult life avoiding attachments, moving from one ranch to another whenever the past threatened to catch up with him. But something about the quiet dignity in the pregnant woman's posture, the way she held herself together despite obvious exhaustion, stirred something long dormant in his chest. "She can have my room," he said, surprising himself almost as much as everyone else in the establishment. "I paid up through the week. It's hers now," Morris sputtered. "Now see here, I'll sleep in the stable with my horse," Lucas continued, ignoring the innkeeper's protests. "Wouldn't be the first time." Nora stared at the cowboy, her green eyes wide with surprise and a flicker of suspicion. "Sir, I couldn't possibly. You can and you will," Lucas said firmly but not unkindly. He turned back to Morris. "Give the lady my key. Room 4. Morris hesitated, his gaze darting between the cowboy and the pregnant woman. Finally, with a disgruntled sigh, he reached behind him and retrieved a key from a hook on the wall. "Fine. But any trouble comes of this, it's on your head, Jameson." Lucas took the key and offered it to Nora. "It ain't much, but it's clean and warm. There's a basin for washing up, and the room's right above the kitchen so it stays warmer than most." Nora accepted the key with trembling fingers. "I don't know how to thank you, Mr. Jameson. This is incredibly kind." He shrugged, suddenly uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Just doing what any decent man would do, madam. You got bags." "Just one trunk in my wagon," she replied, "and it's Mrs. Blackwell, Nora Blackwell." "I'll fetch your trunk, Mrs. Blackwell," Lucas said with a slight nod. "You best get yourself upstairs and off your feet." As Lucas headed toward the door, Nora called after him, "Mr. Jameson." He paused, looking back over his shoulder. "My husband's been dead for 3 months," she said softly. "The baby never knew him. I didn't want you thinking that I had been abandoned." Something flickered in Lucas's eyes, understanding, perhaps, or respect. "Never crossed my mind, madam." Outside, the snow was falling heavier now, the wind cutting through his wool coat as if it were made of paper. Lucas secured his horse in the stable before retrieving Nora's trunk from her wagon. It wasn't heavy, which told him everything he needed to know about her circumstances. A woman traveling alone in her condition, with barely enough possessions to fill a single trunk life, had not been kind to Nora Blackwell. He carried the trunk up to room 4 and knocked softly. When she opened the door, he noticed she had removed her coat and bonnet, revealing dark auburn hair pulled back in a simple bun. Without the bulky outerwear, her pregnancy was even more pronounced. "Where would you like this, madam?" he asked, stepping into the small room. "Anywhere is fine," she replied, backing away to give him space in the cramped quarters. "I truly cannot thank you enough for your kindness, Mr. Jameson." "Lucas," he corrected her as he set the trunk at the foot of the bed. "Folks call me Lucas." "Lucas," she repeated, offering him a small smile that transformed her tired face. He cleared his throat. "There's a dining room downstairs. Food ain't fancy, but it's filling. You should get something to eat." "I will," she promised. "Once I've had a moment to collect myself." Lucas nodded and turned to leave, but hesitated at the door. "If you need anything, Mrs. Blackwell, I'll be in the stable. Just send word." "Nora," she said quietly. "Please call me Nora." Their eyes met briefly, and Lucas felt something shift inside him, a strange, unfamiliar feeling he couldn't quite name. He nodded once more and left, closing the door gently behind him. The stable was cold but not unbearable. Lucas spread his bedroll in an empty stall beside his chestnut gelding, Rusty. The horse nickered softly as Lucas settled in for the night, using his saddle as a pillow. "Don't judge me too harshly, old boy," Lucas murmured to the horse. "Been a long time since I did something that wasn't just about looking out for myself." As he lay in the darkness listening to the howl of the wind outside, Lucas found himself thinking about Nora Blackwell. There was something about her that had compelled him to act something beyond her obvious need. A quiet strength, perhaps, or the vulnerability she tried so hard to conceal. Whatever it was, he had a feeling that giving up his room was only the beginning of their story. The morning dawned clear and cold, the storm having passed in the night. Lucas woke before sunrise, as was his habit, and took care of Rusty before heading into the inn to warm himself by the fire in the main room. He was nursing a cup of strong black coffee when Nora appeared on the stairs. She looked better after a night's rest, though still pale. She had changed into a clean dress, dark blue with tiny white flowers, and her hair was neatly arranged. She spotted him immediately and made her way to his table. "Good morning, Mr. Lucas," she corrected herself, offering a small smile. "I hope you weren't too uncomfortable in the stable." Slept like a baby, he lied, rising to pull out a chair for her. You're looking better this morning. Amazing what a warm bed can do, she said, sitting carefully. I wanted to thank you again. I don't know what I would have done if no need to dwell on it, Lucas interrupted gently. You mentioned you're heading to Silver City, Nora nodded, absent-mindedly running a hand over her belly. My aunt lives there. At least she did when she last wrote to my mother years ago. I'm hoping she'll take me in until I can figure out what to do next. That's a difficult journey in your condition, Lucas observed. Especially this time of year, the pass can be treacherous after snow. I don't have much choice, she replied with quiet determination. I have to try. There's nothing left for me back east. Before Lucas could respond, the innkeeper's wife, a stout woman named Martha, approached their table with a pot of coffee and a plate of biscuits. Thought you might be hungry, dear, she said to Nora, her manner far kinder than her husband's had been. Growing a baby takes a lot out of a body. I should know had 6 myself. Thank you, Nora said gratefully, accepting the plate. That's very kind. Martha refilled Lucas's cup. You did a good thing last night, Jameson, she said in a low voice. Morris can be hard-headed about his precious inn, but he doesn't speak for all of us. After Martha left, Lucas watched as Nora ate with the careful deliberation of someone who had learned to make food last. It stirred something uncomfortable in him, a sense of protectiveness he hadn't felt in a long time. I'm heading to Silver City myself, he found himself saying. Got some business with the cattle buyers there. Nora looked up, surprise evident in her expression. Oh. Thought maybe we could travel together, he continued, the words coming out before he'd fully considered them. Roads can be dangerous for a woman alone, and with the weather being what it is. That's very generous, Nora said slowly, studying his face, but I wouldn't want to be a burden. No burden, Lucas assured her. I'm going that way anyhow, might as well have company. She hesitated, clearly weighing her limited options against the prospect of accepting more help from a stranger. Finally, she nodded. If you're sure it's no trouble, I would be grateful for the escort. It's settled then, Lucas said, feeling oddly pleased. We'll leave after breakfast if you're up to it. Should make it to Silver City in 2 days if the weather holds. As they prepared to depart Stein's Pass, Lucas insisted on tying Nora's wagon to his horse and having her ride with him on Rusty. The gelding was strong enough to handle both of them, and it would be safer than her trying to manage the wagon on the mountain roads. I can drive a wagon, she protested as he helped her onto the horse. I made it this far, didn't I? That you did, Lucas agreed, swinging up behind her. But humor me. The trail gets narrow in places, and Rusty here is sure-footed. Having her sitting in front of him, the curve of her back against his chest and her scent something like lavender and clean soap filling his nostrils was more distracting than Lucas had anticipated. He was acutely aware of the need to keep space between them where possible, to maintain a respectful distance despite their physical proximity. They left Stein's Pass behind, the small mining town quickly disappearing as they headed northeast towards Silver City. The trail wound through stark desert landscape, rugged and beautiful in its desolation. Snow lingered in the shadows of rocks and cacti, glittering in the winter sunlight. How long have you been a cowboy? Nora asked after they had ridden in silence for some time. Most of my life, Lucas replied. Started working cattle when I was 14. Been with the Diamond Cross for about 5 years now. Do you have family nearby? Lucas was quiet for a moment. No family to speak of. Nora seemed to sense his reluctance to elaborate. I'm sorry. That was presumptuous of me to ask. No need to apologize, he assured her. What about you? Besides your aunt in Silver City? No one, she said softly. My parents died when I was young. I was raised by an older cousin who passed away 2 years ago. Then I met Daniel, my husband. He was a school teacher. Her voice grew wistful. We weren't married long before he took ill. Pneumonia. It was very quick. I'm sorry, Lucas said, meaning it. That's a heavy burden to bear. Life doesn't always give us choices about our burdens, she replied. Only how we carry them. They continued on, the conversation flowing more easily as the miles passed. Lucas found himself sharing stories of his life on the range, tales of cattle drives and the characters he'd worked with over the years. Nora was an attentive listener, asking thoughtful questions that revealed her intelligence and curiosity about a world so different from her own. By mid-afternoon, they reached a small creek where Lucas suggested they stop to rest and water the horse. He helped Nora down from Rusty, his hands lingering perhaps a moment longer than necessary at her waist. She winced slightly as her feet touched the ground. "You all right?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. "Just stiff from riding," she assured him, rubbing her lower back. "And the baby seems to think my ribs make a fine punching bag." Lucas watched as she walked slowly to the creek's edge, one hand supporting her belly. There was something both vulnerable and strong about her that continued to intrigue him. She was a woman facing impossible circumstances with a quiet dignity that he found himself admiring more with each passing hour. They ate a simple meal of jerky and hardtack that Lucas had in his saddlebags. As they prepared to continue their journey, dark clouds began gathering on the horizon. "Looks like more snow coming," Lucas observed, frowning at the sky. "We'd best find shelter before nightfall. There's an old line shack about 5 miles ahead that the ranch hands use during roundup. It's not much, but it's solid. Will we still make it to Silver City tomorrow?" Nora asked, concern evident in her voice. "Depends on the weather," Lucas replied honestly. "But we'll get you there, don't worry." The temperature dropped rapidly as they rode, the wind picking up and carrying the first flakes of snow. Lucas urged Rusty to a faster pace, worried about getting Nora to shelter before the storm hit in earnest. He could feel her shivering against him despite the heavy coat she wore. The line shack came into view just as the snow began falling more heavily, a small, sturdy structure nestled against a rocky outcropping that provided some natural shelter from the wind. Lucas helped Nora dismount and quickly led Rusty to the lean-to at the side of the shack. The interior of the cabin was spare but clean, with a small iron stove, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, and a narrow bed pushed against one wall. Lucas immediately set about building a fire in the stove while Nora stood huddled in her coat, looking around. "You take the bed," Lucas said as he coaxed the kindling to flame. "I'll sleep on the floor." "This seems to be becoming a habit," Nora observed with a faint smile. "You giving up your bed for me?" "Just being practical," Lucas replied, though his heart quickened inexplicably at her smile. "Floor's no place for a woman in your condition." As the cabin slowly warmed, they settled into a companionable routine. Lucas brought in supplies from the wagon and tended to Rusty, making sure the horse was comfortable in the lean-to. Nora found some beans and salt pork in the shack's meager stores and set about preparing a simple meal. Outside, the storm intensified, snow swirling in white sheets past the single window. The wind howled around the corners of the cabin, but inside it was warm and surprisingly cozy. The scent of cooking food filled the small space as Lucas returned from checking on the horse one last time. "Smells good," he said, hanging his coat on a peg by the door and stamping the snow from his boots. "It's nothing fancy," Nora replied, stirring the pot on the stove, "but it will be hot." They ate in comfortable silence, the only sounds the clink of spoons against tin plates and the crackle of the fire in the stove. Lucas found himself studying Nora when she wasn't looking, the gentle curve of her neck, the way the firelight caught in her auburn hair, the delicate movements of her hands. After they had eaten and cleaned up, Nora sat on the edge of the bed, visibly exhausted. Lucas spread his bedroll on the floor nearby and sat on it, pulling off his boots. "Do you think your aunt will be surprised to see you?" he asked, breaking the silence. "I imagine so," Nora replied, unpinning her hair and letting it fall around her shoulders in waves. "We haven't had contact in many years. I'm not even certain she's still in Silver City, but it was the only place I could think to go." "What will you do if she's not there?" Nora's hands stilled in her hair. I don't know," she admitted. "Find work somewhere, I suppose, after the baby comes." I was a teacher back east before I married Daniel. Perhaps I could do that again. Lucas nodded, impressed by her resourcefulness and determination. Silver City's growing, might be they need teachers. Perhaps. She resumed, brushing her hair. And what about you, Lucas? What are your plans after Silver City? He shrugged. Back to the ranch, I suppose. Spring roundup will be starting soon enough. Do you ever tire of it? She asked. The constant movement, the solitude, the question caught him off guard. No one had ever asked him that before. Never really thought about it, he said honestly. It's the life I know. Never wanted a home of your own, a family. Lucas was quiet for a long moment, considering, maybe once, a long time ago. He met her eyes across the small cabin. Life doesn't always give us what we want. No, she agreed softly. It doesn't. Something passed between them in that moment, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits, two people who had learned the hard lessons of life but somehow kept going. We should get some rest, Lucas said eventually, breaking the spell. Got a long ride tomorrow if the weather clears. Nora nodded and settled onto the bed, pulling the rough woolen blanket up to her chin. Good night, Lucas, and thank you for everything. Good night, Nora, he replied, lying back on his bedroll and staring up at the ceiling. Sleep well. But sleep eluded Lucas long into the night. He lay awake listening to Nora's soft, regular breathing and the howl of the wind outside, wondering at the strange turn his life had taken in the past 24 hours. He had never been one to involve himself in others' problems, preferring to keep to himself and avoid complications. Yet here he was, escorting a pregnant widow across dangerous winter terrain, sleeping on a hard floor while she took the only bed, and most surprising of all, not minding any of it. There was something about Nora Blackwell that had gotten under his skin, though he was reluctant to examine that feeling too closely. She would find her aunt in Silver City, start her new life, and he would return to the Diamond Cross. Their paths had crossed briefly, that was all. No sense in making more of it than it was. With that firmly in mind, Lucas finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, the sound of Nora's breathing a strangely comforting counterpoint to the storm raging outside. Nora woke in the early morning hours to sharp pain radiating across her abdomen. At first she tried to ignore it, attributing the discomfort to the long ride and unfamiliar bed. But as the pain intensified and began to come in regular waves, a flicker of fear took root in her chest. No, she whispered into the darkness. Not now, not here. She sat up slowly, pressing one hand to her swollen belly as another contraction built. This was too soon. The baby wasn't due for another month, and they were stranded in a lined shack in the middle of nowhere during a snowstorm. A particularly strong pain forced a small gasp from her lips, and she heard Lucas stir on the floor beside the bed. Nora. His voice was thick with sleep. You all right? She hesitated, not wanting to alarm him but increasingly certain that she was in labor. I'm not sure, she admitted finally. I think the baby might be coming. Lucas sat up immediately, fully awake now. The baby, but I thought you said, I know, Nora interrupted, struggling to keep her voice calm as another contraction began. It's too early, but I don't think the baby cares about that. Lucas was on his feet in an instant, lighting the lantern on the table. In the soft glow, Nora could see the concern etched on his face. What do you need? He asked, his voice steady despite the panic she could see in his eyes. What can I do? Water, she said, gritting her teeth against the pain. Hot water, and clean cloths if you can find any. Lucas moved with purpose, stoking the fire in the stove and setting a pot of water to boil. He rummaged through the cabin's sparse supplies, finding a few relatively clean towels in a trunk under the window. Outside, the storm continued unabated, snow piling against the door and window. They were well and truly stranded until it passed. The hours that followed were a blur of pain and fear for Nora. The contractions came faster and stronger, leaving her gasping for breath in the brief respites between them. Lucas stayed by her side, offering water and support, his steady presence a lifeline in her sea of pain. I can't do this, she whispered after a particularly vicious contraction. I'm not strong enough. Yes, you can, Lucas said firmly, squeezing her hand. You're the strongest person I know, Nora Blackwell. You've made it this far on your own. You can do this too. His words gave her courage, and as the sun began to rise behind the snow-laden clouds, casting a diffuse gray light through the cabin window, Nora felt a new pressure and an overwhelming urge to push. It's time, she gasped, clutching Lucas's hand so tightly her knuckles turned white. The baby's coming now. Lucas's face paled, but he nodded resolutely. Tell me what to do. What followed was the most intense experience of Nora's life, pain beyond anything she had imagined, fear that threatened to overwhelm her, and finally, the miracle of her child entering the world with a lusty cry that filled the small cabin. It's a boy, Lucas announced, his voice filled with awe as he wrapped the squalling infant in one of the clean towels. A perfect little boy. Tears streamed down Nora's face as Lucas placed the baby in her arms. She looked down at her son's red, wrinkled face, overwhelmed by a love so fierce it took her breath away. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "You're early, but you're here." Lucas busied himself with cleaning up, giving Nora a moment of privacy with her newborn son. When he returned to the bedside, his expression was one of wonder and profound respect. "You did it," he said softly. "You're amazing, Nora." She looked up at him, this man who had been a stranger just days ago and now had helped bring her child into the world. "We did it," she corrected him. "I couldn't have managed without you, Lucas." Their eyes met and held, something unspoken passing between them. Then the baby squirmed in her arms, breaking the moment. "He needs a name," Lucas said, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed. Nora studied her son's face, thinking of the journey that had brought them to this point. "Daniel," she said finally. "After his father, Daniel Thomas Blackwell. It's a good name," Lucas approved. "Strong." "Thomas was my father's name," Nora explained, tracing a gentle finger along her son's cheek. "And my cousin who raised me. It seems fitting to honor them all." The storm outside began to abate as the day progressed, the howling wind dying down to occasional gusts. Nora rested, exhausted from the birth but unable to stop staring at her son. Lucas brought her food and water, checked on Rusty, and periodically opened the door to gauge the weather. "Snow's stopped," he reported in the late afternoon, "but there's a good 2 feet on the ground. We won't be going anywhere for at least another day, maybe 2. "Is that a problem?" Nora asked, suddenly anxious. "I know you have business in Silver City." "The cattle buyers can wait," Lucas assured her. "You and little Daniel need time to rest before we attempt the journey." The next 2 days passed in a peaceful cocoon of new routines centered around the baby. Nora was surprised at how naturally Lucas adapted to having an infant in the small cabin. He never complained about the crying that sometimes went on for hours, or the constant need for clean cloths and warm water. On the contrary, he seemed genuinely interested in Daniel, watching with fascination as Nora nursed him or gently bathed his tiny body in a basin by the stove. Once, she caught Lucas speaking softly to the baby while she rested, telling him stories about life on the range and promising to teach him to ride a horse when he was old enough. The tenderness in Lucas's voice, the gentle way he looked at her son, stirred something in Nora's heart that she hadn't expected to feel again after Daniel's death. It was too soon, she told herself. Too complicated. And yet, the feeling persisted, growing stronger each time Lucas smiled or offered his finger for the baby to grasp in his tiny hand. By the 3rd day, the snow had melted enough that Lucas deemed it safe to continue their journey. He fashioned a sling from one of the clean towels so that Nora could carry Daniel close to her body, protected from the cold. "It's only about 15 miles to Silver City from here," Lucas explained as they prepared to leave. "Should make it by nightfall if we take it slow." Nora nodded, trying to ignore the strange reluctance she felt at the prospect of reaching their destination. The line shack had become a sanctuary of sorts, a place apart from the world where she had found not only safety, but an unexpected connection with the quiet cowboy who had given up so much for her comfort. They set out under clear blue skies, the snow-covered landscape glittering in the sunlight. Lucas was even more attentive than before, frequently checking on Nora and Daniel as they rode. The baby slept peacefully in his sling, lulled by the gentle motion of the horse. "How are you feeling?" Lucas asked after they had been riding for a couple of hours. "We can stop and rest if you need to." "I'm all right," Nora assured him, though her body was still sore from the birth. "Better to keep moving while the weather's good." They stopped briefly at midday to eat and allow Nora to nurse Daniel. Lucas built a small fire to warm them, and they sat side by side on a fallen log, watching the smoke curl upward into the clear sky. "What will you do after we reach Silver City?" Nora asked, breaking the comfortable silence. "Will you return to the Diamond Cross right away?" Lucas poked at the fire with a stick, his expression thoughtful. "Thought I might stay a few days," he said after a moment. "Make sure you and the little one get settled with your aunt." "That's very kind," Nora replied, touched by his consideration, "but you've already done so much." "I wouldn't want to keep you from your work. Boss can spare me a while longer," Lucas said with a shrug. "Winter's a slow time on the ranch anyway." They continued their journey, the terrain gradually changing as they approached Silver City. The narrow trail widened into a proper road, and they began to pass other travelers, a wagon loaded with supplies, a rider on a paint horse, a family in a buckboard headed toward town. Silver City appeared in the distance as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, a sprawling collection of buildings nestled in a valley surrounded by mountains. Smoke rose from chimneys, and even from a distance, they could see people moving about in the streets. "Do you know where your aunt lives?" Lucas asked as they approached the outskirts of town. "She mentioned Chihuahua Hill in her last letter to my mother," Nora replied, scanning the unfamiliar town with apprehension. "It's been so many years, though, I'm not even sure she's still there." Lucas guided Rusty toward the center of town, where they stopped to ask directions from a helpful shopkeeper. Chihuahua Hill, it turned out, was a neighborhood on the western edge of town, named for its predominantly Mexican population. "Your aunt's name?" the shopkeeper asked. "Eleanor Bennett," Nora replied. "Though she may have remarried, it's been over 10 years since we've had any contact." The man shook his head. "Don't know any Bennetts on the hill, but there's a senora who runs a boarding house up there. She knows everyone in the neighborhood, named Sanchez." With these directions in mind, they made their way toward Chihuahua Hill as the last light of day faded from the sky. The streets were quieter here, the houses smaller but well kept. They found the boarding house easily enough, a 2-story adobe structure with warm light glowing in the windows. Lucas helped Nora down from Rusty, his hands gentle at her waist. Daniel stirred in his sling but didn't wake. "Ready?" Lucas asked softly. Nora took a deep breath, suddenly nervous. "What if she doesn't remember me? Or worse, what if she remembers me but doesn't want anything to do with me?" "Then we'll figure something else out," Lucas assured her. "One step at a time." They approached the door together, and Lucas knocked firmly. A moment later, it was opened by a middle-aged woman with salt and pepper hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her sharp eyes took in their appearance with obvious curiosity. "Can I help you?" she asked, her English accented but clear. "We're looking for Eleanor Bennett," Nora said, her voice steadier than she felt. "She would be my aunt." The woman's expression changed to one of surprise. "Bennett." "No Bennetts here, but—" She paused, studying Nora's face more closely. "What is your name, child?" "Nora Blackwell. My mother was Catherine Bennett before she married." Recognition dawned in the woman's eyes. "Dios mio," she breathed. "Catherine's daughter." "Eleanor spoke of you, but that was years ago, we thought. Well, when the letters stopped coming." "My mother passed away when I was 14, Nora explained. "Is my aunt here? Does she still live in Silver City?" The woman's face fell. "I am sorry to tell you this, especially after you have come so far, but Eleanor died 3 years ago. Influenza took her, along with many others that winter." Nora felt as if the ground had dropped out from beneath her feet. Her last hope, the only plan she had made, suddenly vanished like smoke. She swayed slightly, and Lucas's hand immediately went to her elbow, steadying her. "I'm very sorry for your loss, madam," he said to the woman. "Is there perhaps an hotel in town where Mrs. Blackwell and her baby could stay for the night? It's been a long journey." "Hotel." "No, no," the woman said firmly. "You will stay here. I am Magdalena Sanchez. Alina was my dear friend for many years. Her niece and her niece's child are welcome in my home." Before Nora could protest, Senora Sanchez had ushered them inside, clucking over Daniel and expressing shock that Nora had been traveling so soon after giving birth. "And in this weather, it is not safe," she scolded gently, leading them into a warm sitting room where a fire crackled in the hearth. "The baby is so small. How many days old?" "3," Lucas answered when Nora seemed too overwhelmed to speak. "Born during the snowstorm in a lined shack about 15 miles from here." Senora Sanchez crossed herself. "Mater de Dios, you are both very lucky. Come, I will show you to a room." "You must rest, and your husband as well." "Oh, Mr. Jameson isn't," Nora began, but Lucas interrupted her. "I'll be finding other accommodations, madam," he said politely. "Just wanted to make sure Mrs. Blackwell and the baby got here safely." Senora Sanchez looked between them with raised eyebrows but didn't comment. "There is a hotel near the plaza, Martinez Hotel, clean rooms, fair prices." "Thank you," Lucas said with a nod. "I'll head there shortly." "First, you will eat something," the older woman insisted, "both of you. Then we can discuss arrangements." She bustled off to the kitchen, leaving Nora and Lucas alone in the sitting room. Nora sank into a comfortable chair, feeling suddenly exhausted. The emotional toll of learning about her aunt's death, combined with the physical demands of the journey and recent childbirth, left her feeling hollow and uncertain. "What am I going to do now?" she whispered, more to herself than to Lucas. He knelt beside her chair, his blue eyes earnest. "You're going to rest," he said firmly. "Get your strength back, bond with your son, everything else can wait." "But I can't impose on Senora Sanchez indefinitely," Nora protested. "I need to find work, a place to live." "One day at a time," Lucas reminded her. "For tonight, you have a roof over your head and someone who seems genuinely happy to help. That's enough for now." His steady presence and practical advice calmed her racing thoughts. Nora found herself nodding, accepting the wisdom in his words. "Thank you," she said softly. "For everything, Lucas. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't given me your room that night." "Best decision I ever made," he replied, the corner of his mouth lifting in a small smile. Something shifted in the air between them, a tension that had been building since that first night in Stein's Pass. Nora's eyes dropped to Lucas's mouth, and for a breathless moment, she thought he might lean forward and kiss her. The sound of Senora Sanchez returning with a tray broke the spell. Lucas stood quickly, moving to help the older woman with the food she had brought. They ate a simple but delicious meal of beans, tortillas, and roasted chicken while Senora Sanchez asked questions about their journey and cooed over Daniel, who had woken hungry and was now contentedly nursing in Nora's arms. "He is beautiful," the older woman declared. "A strong boy to survive such a difficult birth." "We were lucky," Nora said, glancing at Lucas. "Mr. Jameson he was incredible. I couldn't have done it without him." Lucas looked embarrassed by the praise. "Any man would have done the same." "No," Nora said firmly, "not any man. What you've been doing since we met, it goes beyond common decency, Lucas. You saved us both." Senora Sanchez watched this exchange with keen interest, her sharp eyes noting the way they looked at each other. "Well," she said finally, standing up, "it is late and you both need rest. Mr. Jameson, will you be staying at the Martinez tonight?" Lucas hesitated, looking at Nora. "If that's still the plan." Nora felt a sudden panic at the thought of Lucas leaving. He had become her anchor in the storm of uncertainty that was her life. But she had no right to ask him to stay, no claim on his time or attention beyond the kindness he had already shown. "Of course," she said, forcing a smile. You've done more than enough. I'm sure you're eager to attend to your business in town. Something like disappointment flickered across Lucas's face, but he nodded. I'll stop by tomorrow, he promised. See how you and Daniel are settling in. After Lucas had gone, Senora Sanchez showed Nora to a small but comfortable bedroom at the back of the house. There was a cradle already set up beside the bed, a relic, the older woman explained, from when her own children were small. Rest now, Senora Sanchez said, patting Nora's hand. Tomorrow we will talk more about Alina, about your plans, but tonight just rest. Alone with Daniel, Nora changed into a clean nightgown from her trunk and settled the baby in his cradle. The events of the past few days caught up with her as she lay in the unfamiliar bed, and tears slipped silently down her cheeks. Her aunt was gone. The one tenuous connection she had hoped to find in this new place had disappeared before she even arrived. She was truly alone now, with a newborn son to care for and no clear path forward. Except she wasn't entirely alone, was she? Lucas had promised to return tomorrow. The thought provided a small measure of comfort as Nora drifted into an exhausted sleep. The following morning, Nora woke to sunlight streaming through the curtains and the sound of voices in the house. Daniel was still sleeping peacefully in his cradle, his tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. She dressed carefully, mindful of her still healing body, and made her way to the kitchen where she found Senora Sanchez preparing breakfast. Ah, good morning. The older woman greeted her warmly. Did you sleep well? Better than I have in weeks, Nora admitted, accepting the cup of coffee Senora Sanchez offered. Thank you for your hospitality, it means more than I can say. It is nothing, the woman insisted. Alina would have wanted it this way. She spoke of you often, you know. She was very proud of her niece who became a teacher. She knew about that, Nora asked, surprised. Of course. The letters from your mother, they told of your accomplishments. Alina kept them all. This revelation brought fresh tears to Nora's eyes. I wish I had known. I wish I had written to her myself after my mother died. Life sometimes takes us in unexpected directions, Senora Sanchez said gently. There is no use in regret. Now, eat something. Your young man will be here soon, I think. He's not Nora began to protest, but was interrupted by a knock at the door. Senora Sanchez's knowing smile suggested she didn't believe Nora's denial. We will see, she said cryptically before going to answer the door. It was indeed Lucas, looking more rested than he had the night before. He had shaved and changed into a clean shirt, and his hair was neatly tied back. He carried a small package wrapped in brown paper. Good morning, he greeted them both. Hope I'm not intruding. Not at all, Senora Sanchez assured him. We were just having breakfast. Join us. Lucas hesitated only briefly before accepting the invitation. As he sat at the table across from Nora, their eyes met, and the warmth in his gaze made her heart skip a beat. How are you and Daniel this morning? He asked. Well rested, Nora replied with a small smile, and grateful to be here. Their conversation over breakfast was easy and comfortable, with Senora Sanchez sharing stories about Alina that made Nora both laugh and cry. It was clear that her aunt had been well loved in the community, respected for her work as a midwife and healer. She would have been so happy to meet her great-nephew, Senora Sanchez said wistfully. She always wanted a large family. After they had eaten, Lucas presented the package he had brought. It's not much, he said, suddenly looking shy, just something I thought might be useful. Nora unwrapped the paper to find a small, beautifully carved wooden rattle. The craftsmanship was exquisite, the wood smooth and polished to a gentle shine. Lucas, she breathed, running her fingers over the carving. It's beautiful. Did you make this? He nodded, his ears turning slightly red. Worked on it last night at the hotel. The wood shop next door was still open and the owner let me use his tools. The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched Nora deeply. Daniel will love it, she said softly. Thank you. Their eyes held for a long moment until Daniel's cry from the bedroom broke the silence. Nora excused herself to tend to him, returning shortly with the baby in her arms. I thought perhaps we might take a walk, Lucas suggested, "if you're feeling up to it. The weather's mild today and I could show you a bit of Silver City." Nora glanced at Senora Sanchez, who nodded encouragingly. "Fresh air will be good for both of you. Go, enjoy the day. I have errands to run anyway." The day was indeed beautiful, the winter sun warming the air to a comfortable temperature. Lucas walked beside Nora, occasionally placing a guiding hand at the small of her back as they navigated the bustling streets of Silver City. He showed her the main plaza, the imposing county courthouse, and the various shops and businesses that served the growing town. "It's larger than I expected," Nora commented as they paused to rest on a bench near the plaza. Daniel was sleeping peacefully in her arms, wrapped snugly in a blanket Senora Sanchez had provided. "It's growing fast," Lucas agreed. "The silver mines bring new people every month. Good place to start fresh." The implication behind his words hung in the air between them. Nora studied his profile, noting the strength in his jaw, the tiny lines at the corners of his eyes that hinted at a life spent outdoors. "You need to return to the Diamond Cross soon," she asked, trying to keep her voice casual. Lucas turned to look at her, his expression unreadable. "Not right away," he said carefully. "Told the boss I might be gone a while, depends on circumstances." "What circumstances?" Nora pressed, her heart beginning to race. Lucas was quiet for a moment, his gaze dropping to Daniel's sleeping face before returning to Nora's eyes. "I've been thinking," he said finally, "about what you said in the line shack, about wanting a home, a place to belong. Yes, I've never had much of either," he continued, his voice low. "Always been moving from one job to the next, one ranch to another, never saw much reason to settle down." He paused, taking a deep breath. Until now, Nora felt a flutter of hope in her chest. "What are you saying, Lucas?" "I'm saying that I care about you, Nora, about you and Daniel, more than I thought possible after knowing someone such a short time, and I'm wondering if you might feel something similar." "I do," she whispered, hardly daring to believe this was happening. "But Lucas, you have to be sure. Taking on a widow with a newborn, it's a lot to ask of any man." "I'm not any man," he replied with quiet confidence, "and you're not just any woman." What happened between us in that line shack, bringing Daniel into the world together, that created something special, at least it did for me. "For me too," Nora admitted, "but it's been such a whirlwind, so much has happened in such a short time." "I don't want you to feel obligated. This isn't about obligation," Lucas interrupted gently. "It's about choice, my choice. And if you'll let me, I'd like to stay, help you get settled here, see where this might lead." The sincerity in his eyes was unmistakable. Nora felt tears welling up, tears of relief, of joy, of possibilities she had thought forever lost to her. "I'd like that very much," she said softly. Lucas's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a gentle, questioning kiss. Nora responded with a sense of coming home, of finding something she hadn't known she was missing. Daniel stirred between them, letting out a small squawk of protest at being slightly squeezed. They broke apart, laughing, and Lucas reached out to stroke the baby's cheek with a tenderness that made Nora's heart swell. "I think he approves," Lucas said with a grin. Over the next few weeks, they fell into a rhythm of life that felt surprisingly natural. Lucas found work at a local livery stable, a temporary position that allowed him to stay in Silver City while they decided what came next. He rented a small room at the Martinez Hotel, but spent most of his days at Senora Sanchez's boarding house with Nora and Daniel. Senora Sanchez, for her part, seemed delighted by the developing romance. She often found reasons to make herself scarce, giving Nora and Lucas time alone together, and was generous with advice about caring for Daniel. "You are good with him," she observed one evening, watching Lucas walk the fussy baby around the sitting room, his large hands cradling Daniel with surprising gentleness. "A natural father. He's an easy baby to love," Lucas replied, his eyes meeting Nora's across the room. The implication was clear. Daniel wasn't the only one easy to love. Nora felt her cheeks warm under his gaze. As Daniel grew stronger and Nora recovered from childbirth, they began to discuss more concrete plans for the future. Lucas had savings from his years of working cattle, enough to make a start somewhere if they chose to. "There's land available outside of town," he told Nora one afternoon as they walked along the banks of the creek that ran through Silver City. "Nothing fancy, but good soil. Could build a small house, maybe raise a few cattle of my own." "You'd give up life on the range?" Nora asked, surprised. "I know how much you love it." Lucas considered this, his expression thoughtful. "Some things are worth giving up," he said finally, "and it wouldn't be giving up entirely. Just changing how I do it, working my own land instead of someone else's." The idea took root and began to grow. They spent hours discussing possibilities, dreams, hopes for a future together. Lucas taught Nora to ride properly, taking her on short trips to see the surrounding countryside. They picnicked on a piece of land that particularly appealed to him, envisioning where a house might stand, where cattle could graze. Daniel thrived under their care, growing rounder and more alert with each passing day. Lucas was endlessly fascinated by the baby's development, celebrating each small milestone as if it were a miracle. "He smiled at me," he announced one morning, bursting into the kitchen where Nora was helping Senora Sanchez prepare breakfast. A real smile, not just gas. The joy on his face made Nora love him all the more, for it was love she knew that now without a doubt. What had begun as gratitude and admiration had blossomed into something deep and true, a love built on shared experience and mutual respect. As spring approached, bringing new green growth to the desert landscape, Lucas and Nora made their decision. They would stay in Silver City, build a life together, raise Daniel and perhaps other children in the years to come. "There's just one thing missing," Lucas said one evening as they sat on the porch of Senora Sanchez's boarding house, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "What's that?" Nora asked, shifting Daniel to her other shoulder as she gently patted his back. Lucas reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, simple ring. The gold band caught the last rays of the setting sun, glinting warmly in the fading light. "This," he said, his voice husky with emotion, "if you'll have it and me." Nora's breath caught in her throat. "Lucas." "I know it's fast," he acknowledged. "And I know Daniel's father hasn't been gone long. If you need more time, I understand. But I love you, Nora Blackwell, you and Daniel both, and I want to be a family, proper and legal." Tears filled Nora's eyes as she looked from the ring to Lucas's face, seeing there all the love and commitment she had ever hoped to find. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you, Lucas Jameson." Their wedding took place on a bright April morning, with Senora Sanchez and a few friends they had made in Silver City as witnesses. Daniel, now 3 months old and growing plump and strong, wore a tiny suit that the ladies of Senora Sanchez's sewing circle had made especially for the occasion. The ceremony was simple but meaningful, held in the small garden behind the boarding house where spring flowers were just beginning to bloom. Nora wore a dress of pale blue, silk, a gift from Lucas that had nearly made her cry when he presented it to her. "You're beautiful," he whispered as they exchanged vows, his blue eyes shining with love and promise. "So are you," she replied, meaning it with all her heart. Their life together began in earnest after the wedding. Lucas purchased the piece of land they had picnicked on, and construction started on a small but sturdy house. He hired a crew of local men to help with the building while he began acquiring a small herd of cattle, the beginning of what he hoped would one day be a successful ranch. Nora found her place in the community as well. With Senora Sanchez's encouragement, she began teaching at the small school on Chihuahua Hill, bringing Daniel with her each day. The children adored the baby, and Nora discovered that her passion for education hadn't diminished during her time away from the classroom. By late summer, their house was complete, a modest but comfortable structure with large windows that looked out over the rolling landscape. They moved in on a warm August evening, carrying Daniel sleeping in his cradle across the threshold of their new home. "Welcome home, Mrs. Jameson," Lucas said, wrapping his arms around Nora's waist and pulling her close for a kiss. "Home," she echoed, leaning into his embrace. "I never thought I'd find one again." That night, as they lay together in their new bedroom, the windows open to catch the cool desert breeze, Nora reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. "You ever think about that night at the inn in Stein's Pass?" she asked, her head resting on Lucas's chest, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. "Often," he admitted, his fingers tracing lazy patterns along her spine. "Best decision I ever made, giving up that room." "Why did you do it?" Nora wondered. "You didn't know me, I was just a stranger in trouble." Lucas was quiet for a moment, considering. "I saw something in you," he said finally. "A strength, a dignity despite everything, and I guess I recognized something of myself in your situation, being alone, facing an uncertain future. It felt right to help." "I'm glad you did," Nora whispered, tilting her face up for his kiss. "So very glad." As the years passed, the small homestead grew and prospered. Lucas's cattle herd expanded, and they added onto the house as their family grew. Daniel was joined by a brother, Matthew, 2 years later, and then by a sister, Emma, the year after that. Lucas proved to be an exceptional father, patient and loving with all 3 children. He taught them to ride almost as soon as they could walk, to respect the land and the animals that sustained them, to be honest and hardworking in all things. Nora continued teaching until Emma was born, then decided to focus on their growing family and ranch. She started a small garden that eventually expanded into a productive vegetable patch, kept chickens for eggs, and became known in the area for her preserves and baked goods. On the 5th anniversary of the day they met, Lucas surprised Nora with a special gift, a small, leather-bound book in which he had written their story, from that first night at the Frontier Inn through the birth of their 3 children. "So they'll know," he explained as Nora turned the pages with tears in her eyes, "how it all began, how close we came to never meeting at all." "If you hadn't given up your room that night," Nora mused, leaning against him on the porch swing they had added the previous summer. "If you hadn't been turned away from the inn," Lucas added, "if the snow hadn't stranded us in the lined shack, if Daniel hadn't decided to make his appearance early." They both laughed softly at the chain of events that had brought them together, some challenging, some painful, all necessary to create the life they now shared. Inside the house, they could hear their children playing. Daniel, now a sturdy 5-year-old with his mother's green eyes and his adoptive father's kind heart. Matthew, 3 and already showing signs of Lucas's quiet determination. And little Emma, just past her first birthday, babbling happily as she toddled after her brothers. "I never expected this," Lucas admitted, his arm tightening around Nora's shoulders. "A home, a family, you. For so long I thought that wasn't in the cards for me." "Life doesn't always give us what we expect," Nora replied, echoing the words Senora Sanchez had spoken to her that first morning in Silver City. "Sometimes it gives us something better." As the sun set over their land, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Lucas leaned down to kiss his wife, the woman who had entered his life as a stranger in need and become the center of his world. "I love you, Nora Jameson," he whispered against her lips. "And I love you," she replied, her heart full to bursting with gratitude for this man, this life, this love that had begun with a simple act of kindness on a cold winter's night. Always. Daniel's laughter rang out from inside the house, followed by Matthew's excited voice calling for their parents. Lucas and Nora exchanged smiles, the kind that held years of shared understanding and joy. "Duty calls," Lucas said, rising and offering Nora his hand. Together they walked into their home, into the warmth and chaos of their family, into the future they had built from the most unexpected of beginnings. A pregnant woman turned away from an inn, a cowboy who gave her his room and, eventually, his heart. And in Silver City, Where their story was well known, people would sometimes tell it to newcomers as an example of how fate worked in mysterious ways, of how kindness could change lives, of how love could grow in the harshest of conditions, like a desert flower blooming after rain. For Lucas and Nora, it was simply their life, the beautiful, ordinary, extraordinary life they had created together, day by day, choice by choice. From that first meeting on a snowy night in Steins Pass to the home and family they now cherished above all else. On the 10th anniversary of their wedding, Lucas surprised Nora with a trip back to Steins Pass. The town had changed, the railroad had brought new prosperity, and the Frontier Inn had been expanded and renovated. But Morris still ran the place, older and perhaps a bit less gruff, but recognizable nonetheless. "Well, I'll be," he said when Lucas and Nora walked through the door, their 3 children trailing behind them. "If it ain't the cowboy and the pregnant lady. Heard you two made quite a life for yourselves over in Silver City." "That we did," Lucas confirmed, his arm around Nora's waist. "Thanks in part to you being such a hard-hearted old cuss that night." Morris had the grace to look embarrassed. "Wasn't my finest moment," he admitted. "Glad to see it worked out all the same." They stayed one night in the inn in room 4, at Lucas's insistence, and then continued on their journey, a family vacation to show the children the path their parents had traveled a decade earlier. When they reached the line shack where Daniel had been born, they found it still standing, though weathered by time. Lucas had arranged with the current ranch owner to visit, explaining the significance of the place to their family history. "This is where I was born," Daniel asked, his 10-year-old eyes wide as he surveyed the humble structure. "Right here," Nora confirmed. "During the biggest snowstorm of the season, and Papa delivered me," he asked, looking up at Lucas with admiration. "He did," Nora said, squeezing her husband's hand. "He was very brave." "Your mama was the brave one," Lucas corrected, ruffling Daniel's hair. "I just caught you when you decided to make your appearance." They picnicked outside the line shack, sharing stories with the children about those early days, how Lucas had given up his room at the inn, how they had been stranded by the storm, how they had fallen in love while bringing a new life into the world. "It's like a storybook," Emma declared, her 7-year-old imagination captivated by the romance of it all. "The best stories are real ones," Nora told her daughter, "the ones we live every day." As they prepared to leave, Lucas hung back for a moment, standing in the doorway of the line shack, lost in memory. Nora joined him, slipping her arm around his waist. "Thinking about that night?" she asked softly. He nodded. "How scared I was, how amazing you were. How tiny Daniel was when he first arrived." He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "How I knew, watching you hold him for the first time, that I wanted to be part of your lives forever. You've given us so much," Nora said, her voice thick with emotion. "A home, a family. A life I never dreamed possible after Daniel died." "You've given me just as much," Lucas replied. "More, you gave me purpose, Nora, a reason to put down roots after years of drifting." They kissed, a tender meeting of lips that held the weight of their shared history and the promise of years still to come. Then, hand in hand, they walked back to their children, to the wagon that would take them home to Silver City, to the life they had built together from the most unlikely of beginnings. And as they drove away from the line shack, Nora looked back one last time at the small structure that had witnessed the birth of both her son and the love that now defined her life. In that moment, she felt a profound gratitude for every step of the journey, even the painful ones that had led her to Lucas Jameson's door on that snowy night in Steins Pass. For what had seemed like the lowest point of her life, alone, pregnant, turned away from the only shelter in town, had in fact been the beginning of the greatest adventure she would ever know. The adventure of loving and being loved, of creating a family and a home, of finding purpose and joy in the everyday miracle of a shared life. And that, Nora reflected as she turned her gaze forward to the road ahead, to the man beside her and the children they cherished, was the greatest gift of all.